Hey everyone, ready to unlock some serious study superpowers? Let's be real for a sec, we've all been there. You know that feeling of information overload, like you're drowning in facts and figures, but nothing's actually sticking?
It's a common struggle.
Well, this deep dive is all about giving you the ultimate study upgrade. Think of it like having a personal study coach in your pocket. We're going to be diving into some seriously expert advice on how to study smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
And get this, our source material for this is a deep dive all on its own. A comprehensive guide on actually improving those study habits. No more surface level stuff here.
We're going deep.
Okay, so let's get into it. We're talking 15 proven study strategies that could totally transform the way you learn.
And you might be surprised to find out that even making small changes to your study routine, like really small tweaks, can make a huge difference in how much you learn and remember.
So we're not talking about spending hours and hours hunched over textbooks.
Not at all. It's all about quality over quantity.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, and our source really stresses that the first step is all about creating the right study environment.
Okay, so that means finding a quiet spot, like holing up in the library or
I
something.
bet it's a bit more than that. It's really about finding what works for you. Some people love the library, others need a cozy corner at home. It's about tailoring that study space to your preferences. And this is key, minimizing distractions.
Oh yeah, so that means silencing the phone
Yeah.
and closing all those tempting tabs of the computer, right?
Yeah.
No more social media black holes.
Resist the temptation if you really want to focus, that is. And here's a curveball for you. The source actually advises against studying in bed.
Wait, really? I thought that was like Study Spot 101. What's wrong with getting comfy?
Well, it has to do with those mental associations. You see, your brain connects your bed with sleep, so when you try and study there, it sends these mixed signals and makes it harder to concentrate.
Ah, that makes total sense. I guess it's kind of like trying to work out at a spa. The environment just doesn't match the activity.
You got it. So once you've nailed down that perfect study space, it's time to tackle the time management beast.
Ooh, yes, time management. Always a struggle. Have you ever tried that Pomodoro technique?
I have.
I've heard of it, but honestly, I'm not sure I know how it works.
It's pretty simple, actually. You break up your study time into these intervals, like 25 minutes of focused work followed by a 5-minute break. And then after you do 4 of those cycles, you take a longer break, maybe 15 or 20 minutes.
So it's kind of like interval training for your brain.
That's a great way to put it. Those bursts of focused work help you avoid burnout and keep your mind fresh. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. Our source is all about flexibility.
So I don't have to be super rigid with that 255 rule.
Not at all. It's about finding what works for you. Maybe 15-minute intervals with 10-minute breaks suit you better. Experiment and see what feels right.
I like that personalized approach.
Yeah.
So we've got our study haven set up, we've got our time management game on point. Now it's time to actually dive into the material, right?
Right. And that's where active learning comes in. Just reading and highlighting, not gonna cut it. It's about really engaging with the information.
So no more passive learning. We got to get those brain cells firing.
Exactly. Our source talks about all sorts of active learning strategies, taking notes, teaching the material to someone else, using mind maps, flashcards, you name it.
Okay, mind maps. I've always been kind of curious about those. Never really tried them though.
They can be really powerful, especially for visual learners. It's a way to visually map out information and see those connections between different concepts. But you know what's really intriguing? One technique that our source highlights is the Feynman technique.
Feynman technique. That's a new one.
It's this idea that if you can't explain a concept simply, like you're teaching it to a child, then you don't really understand it yourself.
So you're basically becoming your own teacher.
Right. It's a really cool way to check your understanding. It forces you to break things down and see where the gaps are.
I love that. No pressure to be perfect right away. Okay, so we're actively engaging, we're teaching ourselves, but let's be real. Sometimes we need some help making things stick.
Right, and that's where memory techniques come in. Our source dives into some really fascinating ones.
Oh yeah, mnemonics, right? Those little acronyms and rhymes that help us remember facts like, my very educated mother just served us noodles for the planets.
Classic. Mnemonics tap into our brain's love for patterns and associations. And another cool one they mention is the method of loci.
Oh wow, that's the one I've heard memory champions use. But how does it actually work?
Imagine you're walking through your home. You mentally place each piece of information you need to remember in a different room. Then when you need to recall it, you just take that mental walk again.
So like creating a memory palace in your mind.
Exactly. The more vivid and detailed you make those mental images, the better you'll remember. And speaking of encoding information, chunking is another key principle that our source emphasizes.
Chunking. That's like breaking down information into smaller, more manageable pieces, right?
Right. Instead of trying to absorb everything at once, you divide it into chunks, which makes it way easier to process and remember.
So it's like building a house, brick by brick. Each chunk becomes this solid foundation for the next.
That's a fantastic analogy. It's about building up your understanding gradually, one mental block at a time.
This is making so much sense. It's like that overwhelming feeling of having to tackle a huge task just starts to melt away when you break it down into smaller steps.
Exactly. And speaking of tackling things strategically, let's talk about the power of spaced repetition.
Oh, spaced repetition. I've heard it's a game changer, but I'm not entirely sure how to actually put it into practice.
It's all based on the idea that we naturally forget information over time, but we can combat that forgetting by reviewing material at spaced intervals.
So instead of cramming, I spread out my study sessions over, say, days, weeks, or even months.
Exactly. And there are some fantastic apps out there that can help you with this. Anki and Quizlet are great examples.
Those can definitely be lifesavers for keeping track of what I need to review and when. I'm starting to see how all of these techniques, they all work together to create this really effective study system.
That's the beauty of it. It's not about finding one magic bullet, but about finding strategies that work for you and combining them in a way that supports your learning journey.
This is already making me rethink my whole approach to studying.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to effective learning.
This is a deep dive for sure, and I, for one, am ready to keep going. But let's take a pause here for now.
Yeah, we'll pick up our exploration in part 2. We've got even more powerful strategies to uncover, and we'll be talking about how to personalize your study plan to really maximize your learning potential.
Welcome back, everyone. I don't know about you, but after that first segment, I am feeling so ready to give my study routine a complete makeover.
It is amazing how much we've already learned, and there's so much more to come.
And I love how all of these strategies can be woven together, to create this really personalized approach to learning.
Absolutely. That's what makes it so powerful.
And that's what I'm excited to dig into. Figuring out how to make all this work for me. It's not about trying to use every single strategy all at once.
No, not at all. It's about picking the ones that really speak to you and that work for you.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like building your own personalized study toolkit, I guess.
That's a great way to think about it.
So how do I know which tools are right for my toolkit,
Well, think about your learning style. What are the challenges you face when you study? Do you get distracted really easily? Do you have trouble remembering things? Once you kind of pinpoint those areas, you can pick strategies that directly address those challenges.
Okay, so say I'm really struggling with focus. Would the Pomodoro technique be a good tool to have in my kit?
For sure. Those little bursts of work followed by breaks, they can be really effective for concentration. And if you get overwhelmed by tons of information, chunking can be a lifesaver too.
Yeah. Breaking things down definitely makes it all feel less overwhelming. But what about note-taking? I have this terrible habit of just highlighting everything, and I know it's not that effective.
Well, and this is what our source really emphasizes. It's all about active engagement with the material, and that applies to note-taking too. So instead of highlighting, try something like the Cornell method or mind mapping.
Okay, Cornell method. I've heard of that. What's so special about it?
So you divide your notes into different sections for main points, summaries, and details. It helps you organize all that information and make those connections. And mind mapping, that's awesome for visual learners. It's like creating this visual map of the material, branching out and making connections as you go.
So it's not just about writing stuff down. It's about actually processing the information as I take notes.
Exactly. And you know what else is super helpful? Teaching. Teaching what you've learned is one of the best ways to solidify your understanding.
Oh, I've heard that. But honestly, I'm not sure I'm comfortable, teaching someone else. I'm not an expert,
It doesn't have to be formal. Just explain a concept to a friend, a family member. Heck, even just talking it out loud to yourself can be helpful. It makes you think critically and realize where you might have gaps in your knowledge.
So it's like turning learning into a conversation.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of actively engaging with the material, don't forget about self-testing.
Quizzes, practice exams. I tend to avoid those like the plague, but yeah, I know they're important.
And they're not just about figuring out what you know. They actually strengthen those neural connections in your brain.
So even if I get answers wrong, it's still a good learning experience.
Totally. It helps you pinpoint your weak spots, and then you can focus your study efforts on those areas.
All right, I'm sold. No more avoiding those quizzes. It's a learning tool, not just an evaluation.
That's the spirit.
Nah.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that often gets overlooked when we talk about studying self-care.
Oh, that is important. It's easy to forget about sleep and proper food, especially when you're stressed about studying.
Oh, I know it. And our source is very clear on this. Self-care is absolutely crucial for optimal learning.
So pulling all-nighters and eating junk food, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, pretty much. Your brain needs rest and fuel to work properly. Try to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, especially before a test. And eat brain-boosting foods, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats.
It's like studying smarter isn't just about these specific techniques, it's about taking care of yourself too, right?
Absolutely. And that leads us to another key aspect, stress management.
Oh, stress. Stress is a constant companion during exam season.
It is, for sure. So what can you do? Well, our source suggests some relaxation techniques to help stay calm and focused. Deep breathing exercises, meditation, even light exercise can work wonders.
So it's not just good for my body, it's good for my mind too.
Exactly. You've got to give your brain those moments of peace and quiet. Let it recharge. Okay, last thing, goal setting. I know it's important, but I'm not the best at setting, realistic goals. Well, remember those SMART goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right. Okay, so instead of just being like, I have to study for that exam, I would say something like, okay, by the end of the day, today I'm going to finish chapters 4 and 5, and I'm going to use the Feynman technique to make sure I understand it all.
Perfect. You're setting a clear target and weaving in one of the study strategies. Now let's bust a myth while we're at it, multitasking.
Multitasking, my supposed superpower. But I have a feeling you're going to tell me it's not as great as it seems.
You read my mind. Our source says multitasking actually makes you less productive. It's much better to focus on one thing at a time. Really give it your full attention.
So put away the phone, close those extra tabs, resist the urge to switch between subjects every 5 minutes.
Exactly. Single tasking is the way to go. It leads to deeper understanding and better retention. And last but not least, let's talk about rewards.
Rewards. Like treating myself after a good study session.
You got it. The source recommends rewarding yourself for those accomplishments. Watch your favorite show, take a relaxing bath, have a little snack. It keeps you motivated.
So it's kind of like positive reinforcement for my brain.
Exactly. It makes studying feel less like a chore and more like a journey with enjoyable milestones along the way.
This is such a great approach to studying. It's like finding that balance between effort and enjoyment. But how do I make sure I stick with it? I've definitely fallen off the wagon before,
It happens. But don't worry, we'll cover that in the next segment. We're going to talk about how to create a personalized study plan that really works for you and how to stay motivated and on track.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. I feel like my brain is overflowing with study tips already, but I'm super excited about this last part. Actually taking everything we've learned and putting it all together.
That's right. It's time to create a study plan, a personalized plan that works for you, your goals, your learning style, the whole package.
Okay, that sounds awesome, but where do I even start? I'm getting a little overwhelmed just thinking about it.
No worries. We'll take it step by step. First things first, remember those SMART goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That's our starting point.
Okay, yeah, so instead of just saying, I need to study for that exam, I'd say something more like, okay, by Friday, I'm going to finish chapters 4 and 5, and I'm going to use the Feynman technique to make sure I really get it.
Perfect. You've got a clear target, and you're incorporating one of those powerful strategies we've been talking about. Remember, it's not about using every single technique. It's about choosing the ones that really click for you and will work best for what you're studying.
Okay, so if I know I'm a visual learner, I might want to try mind mapping instead of just regular note-taking, right?
Exactly. And if you find that the Pomodoro technique helps you focus, build that into your schedule.
Okay, this is starting to feel less scary now. It's like putting together a puzzle, finding those right pieces and making them fit.
That's a great analogy. But just like with puzzles, there might be times where you get stuck. Maybe you hit a roadblock, and that's totally normal.
So what do I do then? What if I'm using the right strategies, but I'm still feeling lost or frustrated?
Well, first, remember, learning is a journey, not a race. It's totally okay to take breaks. Step back, reassess. Sometimes a little walk, a few minutes of meditation, even just switching to a different task can help clear your head and get you back on track.
So self-care is important even when I'm struggling.
Always. And don't be afraid to ask for help, Reach out to a teacher, a tutor, a classmate. Sometimes getting a fresh perspective or a little guidance can make a world of difference.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that,
Yeah.
like that I don't have to do everything by myself.
Exactly. You don't have to go it alone. And speaking of getting support, have you ever thought about study groups?
I've always been kind of on the fence about those. I worry about getting distracted or not being able to work at my own pace.
Yeah, I get it. But honestly, when study groups are done right, they can be so helpful. It's a chance to bounce ideas off each other, clear up any confusion, and stay motivated.
So it's about finding the right group and setting some ground rules for how we're going to work together.
Exactly. And you don't have to join a formal group. Even just having a study buddy can make a big difference.
This whole conversation has really changed how I think about studying. It's not just about memorizing facts or getting good grades. It's about developing a love of learning.
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To embrace curiosity, to be excited about new challenges, and to really enjoy the whole process of learning new things.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I have a whole toolbox of new strategies and a whole new way of thinking about learning.
And remember, the most important tool in that toolbox is you, your unique learning style, and your willingness to try new things, adapt, find what works for you. There's no one right way to study. It's all about finding your own path and, embracing the adventure of learning.
I love that. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you've learned some valuable tips and feel inspired to make learning a more enriching and honestly enjoyable experience. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those minds curious and keep on learning.